It reminds me of a funny story. You probably heard this joke before. John wanted desperately to get out of debt, and he decided the only way he was going to do it was to win the lottery. So he went to church and prayed on his knees, "Lord, help me win the lottery." And the lottery came and went, and he did not win. And he goes, "Well, God favors those who keep on trying." So he comes back and he prays for a second week and says, "Lord, please help me win the lottery. Help me win the lottery so I can get out of debt, and I'll do all these wonderful things." The lottery comes, the lottery goes. He still doesn't win. For a third time he does this, and he prays in earnest and wears out the holes on his jeans. And still he does not win the lottery. So he comes back, looks up to the sky and shouts at God, "How dare you? How dare you? I have always been a good Christian. I've come to church. I've done all the right things. Why won't you let me win the lottery?" A voice comes down from heaven, "John, buy a ticket." Makes you wonder sometimes what assumptions we are making, and maybe what assumptions we're making about how much we need to participate, or how much we just let go and say, "Not me." Our focus passage this week, the feeding of the 5,000, it really should be the 5,000 plus because they didn't count the women and the children. I know. And this version comes from the Gospel of Matthew. But what's very interesting is this is a miracle that's found in every gospel. Not just the synoptics, but all four. Actually, it's one of the few that are that way. And since the different gospels were written for different communities with different needs, the fact that this miracle shows up in every last one of them shows us that this is something that was very important to the early church. For everybody to think that they need to include this shows you how important and pervasive it was. It's certainly an interesting story, one that many of us first learn as children. But what about it makes it so important? Kind of echoing the question we asked last week. Do we really know what's going on? There are, of course, some basic ideas of why this might be important. It's a record of the divine acts of Christ, showing that he is more than just a teacher, that he truly is the Son of God. In this case, he shows the ability to make food and multiply it for everybody, to feed a large group of people. And also the miracle demonstrates Christ's compassion for people, even in the midst of his own grief. But I'm not convinced that either of these is the primary reason that this passage was held so dear by the early church. For truly, there are many miracles out there that show the divine nature of Christ. Whether it's the healing of people, the casting out of demons, the sharing or the walking on waters, or everything else. There's so much that shows Christ is divine. But I'm not sure that's the point of this one. And certainly there are a huge number of teachings and passages that talk about how compassionate Christ was. So I'm not sure we need it for that either. So if that is the case, what's so important about the miracle of the loaves and fishes that it's included in every single gospel? Is there anything that sets it apart, makes it somehow different? You can probably guess I think there is. I think that there is something majorly different with this miracle. Something that truly sets it apart from others. And we see that in the 15th and the 16th verses. As the disciples start to worry. They come up to their teacher and they say, Lord, this is a deserted place. The hour is late. Send them away. Send them away so they may go into villages and take care of themselves. You've done enough. We can't take care of all these people. Get rid of them. We can't do this. And before we beat them up too much, let's be honest. Most of us who have cooked at least one pot of spaghetti can imagine what it would be like to feed 5,000 men plus their families. So in some ways, this is a very rational fear. They could have easily been looking at a crowd of 8,000 to 9,000 people. This is not the sort of group you order out for takeout and hope it'll be here in half an hour. So again, the disciples had a very rational fear. We can't control this situation, teacher. So let's be safe. Get rid of them. And Jesus replies, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. You can imagine you probably could hear a pin drop at that point. And you almost kind of feel sorry for the disciples because they're probably going, what? Did I hear you right? Teacher, you saw the crowds, but still there is that call. You give them something to eat. Now, truly, Christ is the one doing the miracle. It is through his divine hands that all those people were fed that day. However, it's so important for us to notice that Jesus didn't just come in and take over. He didn't somehow wave his hands and make food miraculously appear in front of every hungry mouth. Christ engaged the disciples. He asked them to share what they had, to see past their fear, as rational as it was, and to say, what can you do? Truly, God would provide, but first they had to open up their pockets. They had to open up their hands. And perhaps most important of all, they would have to open up their hearts a little bit more. And disciples are asked to do this not just once, but twice. First, in giving what they had to Christ. They first had to say, here is all I have. Notice, they didn't say, here is a certain percentage. They didn't say, here's what I have left over. They said, here's all I have for dinner. All I have for dinner. And then second, they had to trust Jesus to share it with others. What an incredible place of faith to share everything you have and to trust that the Lord will take care of the gap. In sharing in the divine act, Christ shows the disciples that even though they were first gripped with fear, where they saw too big of a problem, that it would become a situation where there was more than enough. There would be more than enough, more than they originally even chipped in. And it would become a time of great fellowship. It didn't have to stop just because it was dinner time. But first, they had to engage the miracle. They had to see past their fear. They had to participate. They had to be partners. Now, friends, I do believe in my heart of hearts that we are still being called to give the people something to eat, as Christ originally instructed. Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's other things. That's the details of the story. The bones of the story is having the faith in the Christ that shared his grace with us. Having the trust to say, I am going to be part of the solution rather than letting fear grip my heart. But truly, I do say, fear is very powerful. It's that little voice that whispers or even shouts in our ears, you don't have enough. This is too dangerous. You aren't good enough. You aren't strong enough. All these whispers and so much more. And if we are very, very honest with ourselves, we can see how much fear influences our decisions, both as individuals as well as a church. But in all circumstances, God is calling us to quiet our fears and our grumblings, to trust God with what we can pull together, to, as Christ did, give thanks and start sharing. I'll leave you with 3 questions that push to the heart of the matter. Do we believe in a God of miracles? Do we believe in a God who has grace? Do we live that way, or do we live as if fear wins? As we answer those questions for ourselves and for our community, let us hear again what Christ says. You give them something to eat. Amen.